afternoon, everybody. Welcome, thank you very much for being here. So I'm Joanna Page, I'm the director of CRASSH, and we are co-hosting this event with Department of History and Philosophy of Science. And the event is really designed to showcase the work of three of our visitors this term, who are here as part of our Visiting Fellows from the Global South programme. And I just wanted to say a couple of words about that programme before we introduce our visitors. So this is the third year of the programme at CRASSH. It's an enormously important one for us. It allows us to benefit from the experiences and the knowledge that these scholars bring, without which our knowledge of the world would be a lot poorer. We also hope that it's going to be a source of new connections and potential collaborations for them. And our idea about bringing three of them together here at the same time from different regions is to help facilitate connections between those regions, but also to curate the kind of events that we're holding today, where it gives us the chance to think comparatively across regions of the Global South, which are of course extremely diverse. And so each year, CRASSH partners with a different faculty or programme in the university to bring a cohort of scholars here. Last year we partnered with the Faculty of Divinity. We had a call around the theme of religious boundaries. And this year we've been working with colleagues from History and Philosophy of Science to design a call around the theme of science, politics and justice. And our three visiting fellows were selected from a very large pool of applicants. Next year I can announce that we're going to be working with the university's Legacies of Slavery, or Legacies of Enslavement programme. And the call is just closed and we're looking forward to seeing who's applied for that. So as you see from the programme of this event, it's designed to be exciting, very engaging programme. There are excerpts from videos and documentaries, as well as presentations on each of the fellows' research. And I'd encourage you to stay if you can for the round table at the end, where we're going to be bringing together a number of different discussions. The reading that was supplied for that is entirely optional. Please don't feel as though you need to have read the three articles to join us. I think the discussion will be very wide-ranging. So do join us, and of course afterwards for some drinks and a chance to meet others. But I'm now going to hand over to Rosanna Dent, who's the Lipton Lecturer in Recent History of Science, Medicine and Technology, who's going to say a little bit more about the theme of this year's fellowships.
Thanks, Joanna. It's really it's a great pleasure to welcome you to this event, which I really think of as a celebration of our amazing visiting fellows, who, as Joanna just said, were appointed under the theme of science, politics, and justice. So this is a fellowship that the call was written to invite scholars who are interested in examining the ethics, the politics, and histories of scientific, medical, and technical knowledge-making, and to really explore some of the ways in which science has been mobilized, particularly around struggles for justice. It asks us to consider science not as neutral or abstract, but as situated, as embedded in institutions, as shaped by power, and as entangled with projects of governance, development, resistance, and reform. And I think we're going to see that in so many different ways today through our fellows' talks. So I just wanted to start really briefly by thanking CRASSH, thanking Joanna Page, and especially Zainab Akhtar. Thank you, Zainab, for all of the work that you did to make this possible, as well as many others who I'm sure were behind it. And also to thank Wolfson College, who are hosting our fellows, and to thank my department, the History and Philosophy of Science, for being so behind this. And particularly the call was developed by Dr. Charu Singh, and unfortunately for us, but luckily for her, she's on research leave this year at Stanford at the Humanities Center, so she put a lot of effort into this program and hasn't been able to, and then I get to benefit, and we all get to benefit. She hasn't been here to be able to be able to engage in the ways that we all are. So I just wanted to say that Charu really crafted the vision for HPS to partner, and that I think was really important. So we've got three brilliant scholars whose work is grounded in really interesting concrete case studies that engage in different ways with communities who are often overlooked, not centered as often in discussions of science and technology. And so I'm going to introduce them and then hand it over to them. So our first fellow is Chidi Ugwu, Professor of Health Anthropology at the University of Nigeria in Nsukka. He holds a PhD in anthropology, has received a wide variety of grants, and has used them to do really fascinating research into asymmetries of knowledge and power, particularly in the area of public health. So here we're thinking mostly with our medicine questions and health questions. Among other things, his work in the past has touched on the Rollback Malaria Program. He's done recent work on a Médecins Sans Frontières program, a nutrition program, and the political limitations of that program. And here, as a CRASSH fellow, he is writing an ethnography of indigenous healing practices in southeastern Nigeria, which is what we're going to hear about. And his work explores how Igbo-speaking healers navigate the pressures of Christianity and biomedicine and strategically adapt while preserving sort of core elements of indigenous healing practice. And so his work, I think, really highlights some of the kind of subtle, everyday forms of resistance through which local actors negotiate and sometimes decenter dominant systems of knowledge. So Chidi really will help to expand our understanding of health practice as part of an anti-colonial struggle in ways that include the intimate terrains of health, spirituality, I think, and care. Then our second fellow and speaker today is Professor Mercedes Ejarque. Mercedes is a researcher at the National Institute of Agricultural Technology. She's also a professor of rural sociology at the University of Buenos Aires. And she's worked on a broad range of topics, including rural labor markets, rural-urban tendencies, local consumption, and commercialization. And here at CRASSH, she's examining the intersections of environmental science, agrarian policy, and social inequality in the context of Patagonia. And her research that we'll hear about today investigates how problems such as desertification and climate change are socially constructed problems. They're scientifically modeled and translated into public policy. So among other things, she's interested in the way that biophysical sciences have played kind of a decisive role in framing environmental crises, and also in demonstrating that these scientific models are shaped by a variety of factors: international agendas, national development strategies, local power relations. I think we're going to hear a little bit about all of that. And really at stake in her work are some of the kind of key questions, not only of ecological futures, but also the rights and livelihoods of rural populations. So that will be our second talk. We're going to have a little brief pause in the middle for coffee break, and that will then bring us back to our final speaker, Dr. Khetrimayum Monish, a postdoctoral researcher fellow at the Southeast Asia Center for Digital Technology and Society at Monash University in Malaysia. So Monish's work examines the political life of digital identity infrastructures in South and Southeast Asia. And while he's here at CRASSH, he is working on a project that offers a comparative study of biometric ID systems, and that includes India's Aadhaar and Malaysia's MyCAD systems. And is looking at how digital public infrastructures are being governed and implemented in these two cases. And what are the challenges, asking what are the challenges that this implementation poses. So while these kinds of systems, of course, we know are often celebrated as tools of efficiency and development, Monish's research really foregrounds questions of data protection, of privacy, of exclusion. He talks about this in terms of data justice. So I think Monish's work really speaks very directly to the science, politic, and justice call, just like the other fellows do, in attending to questions of moral responsibilities of technoscience governance, and the politics that are embedded in infrastructures that increasingly define citizenship. So I think you'll get a sense these three projects are really wonderful. They span a kind of wide range of, from digital governance, environmental science, and indigenous medicine, but they're all unified by a kind of shared commitment to examining what we in HPS are really dedicated to, which is the question of science in action, and how science and scientific work, medical work, technological innovation are shaped by political interests, how they structure everyday life, and how they can become a terrain of struggle for justice. So we're really delighted to have these fellows here with us, and we're looking forward to the conversation all afternoon. And then just to mention again, at the end we're going to have a roundtable discussion, which will be there'll be a Q&A at the end of each session. But please stay for the discussion, where we'll try to bring together some of the themes across the talks. So thank you all for being here, and especially thank you to our three fellows for sharing your work with us.
So I don't mean to start making a presentation yet, but it's just to call your attention to one more thing that I don't know whether you took notice of. How I find it difficult to intellectualize in my language. Somehow I struggled to ask the questions, and I kept bringing English terms, and it's already a challenge, right? So yeah, it's one of the things when I think about myself and my role as a scholar in my community, and so I'm wondering how much I can claim that the knowledge I have about my community is really authentic, if there's anything like that, or how even the data that I collect, how much I think I really understand how, I'm just troubled generally. So that's it. I think if people have issues to raise, or you need me to say, so this is a healer, but so you have people who do different forms of healing. Some are diviners, some are spiritual healers, some people call them shamans, but some also take offense with that word. So some are herbalists, those who do not claim some to control any supernatural agency. They just focus on using herbs. So that's where this guy falls in. So you are going to see another video, very short, during my presentation, where I try to then present. So I call these people secular healers, those who don't claim supernatural sort of. So then I call the others sacred healers, those who claim they have some spiritual. So this is the secular one. So the sacred healer, you will see in the opening when my presentation will open. So it just had an interaction with him, and you noticed he first complained, for example, just to draw attention to the sort of epistemic battle. Is it just epistemic, even material? The kind of praxis they enact, how their understanding of the environment and the challenges they are facing and the forces they are up against. So you remember when I asked the challenges, he told me insecurity, right? People were not safe because the so-called bandits and terrorists, which is a long story I was telling people last night, which is a continuation of the global capitalist movement looking for rare earth in parts of Nigeria, using some of these forces as mercenaries to remove people from their dwelling places and then go there to mine the minerals. Chinese, the French, the British. So anyways, so it's one of the challenges. The wire, the forest, the bush has become a bit, it's a very tough ground too. So he holds the government responsible. The government, the state is too weak. The government, they are not performing. But at some point, he realizes that this recording could go out. Then begins to tell me how all the government officials are doing well. All the government, did you see that? Yeah, that they are all doing well, performing excellently, and then started mentioning the governor and everybody else. So you saw how measured. So it warns you that if you are interviewing people in the field, don't take their word for it, right? So that is one of the reasons we think ethnographic participant observation is very key, like in getting you to get information you think you can bet on. So that even after asking people questions, you still stick around, you're part of the environment, and you're able to see whether they were measuring their words when they spoke to you, whether there are things that would confirm to you that this is not the whole truth. You know. So basically, why I did 2 interviews, but I thought they were almost the same, making the same points. I didn't want to start merging. This is so just to help you see the tension these people are navigating, the tension they are, and the things the challenges, especially if you like, the homogenizing forces, state, the biomedical practitioners, Christianity. You know, these are hefty forces of, you know, expanding from the West. But I'm going to say more about some of these forces and whether they're actually the West, right? Whether they're actually Western institutions in the real sense of it. Okay, so I think that's it. So I will say more in my presentation, but it's just to help you see what the way a typical healer reacts when the camera is focused on them. Yeah. Yes.
Do you want to carry on? Do you want to carry on with your presentation?
Okay. Yeah. Maybe.
Okay.
All right.
Do you need me to sit?
Zainab taught me something, but I'm wondering whether. Okay. Let's see. Okay. That's it. Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to press?
So
Press the slideshow.
here. No.
Up. Nope. Shall I do it?
Yes. F, right? F.
I'm not stealing. My
So-
God will bless you. Once
what-
open the day, woman, the day is holy. My God will bless you. And a big If God Almighty that have money, that have water, no human being on earth. There is only one power and there is only one God. Jehovah, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. Any other God you know, it does not concern me. This boy. That's a lot of work.
So he's paying them some money to attract people to their life.
I does not support any evil. I'm here to work. You that is speaking against me, the money you are wasting in a club is more than this 50 naira very here. Even more than I'm not wasting money, neither. I'm helping people to get money from God, not from Satan. If they get money, they will help their government. We are helping government because if you raise the billionaire, you raise their own community. So I bless you are sitting in the mighty name of Jesus. All the prophets that I respect so much in the world, Apostle Justice Suleiman, Prophet Jeremiah Omota Ofuyo, all my brothers in the Christendom, I greet you. Level for the came back up, one in the table, I greet all of you. It shall be well with all of you. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth.
Okay, so this is the transcription, right? So I will So I know you managed to pick what he was saying, right? Even though it was so, but pay attention to, I already showed this, to where he then aligns himself with God, right? But that scene is a typical traditional healer's scene, right? Where these are people who feel they need luck in their businesses, in their search for, he performs some ritual to attract luck. Whether material, you are looking for a job, you are doing business or whatever. So he then takes them to that river that is believed to be inhabited by certain force that helps to do this, and then sprays money as part of a way to attract money, in terms of that, to attract the spirit of money, sort of. So, but what is interesting is that if he remained, so you saw he dressed like a Christian priest, right? If he remained his true traditional healer self, dressed in traditional healer with some white stuff, many of these people will hesitate to come. Not that they don't know that this guy is not a Christian priest, but the optics. They don't need people to know they are meeting someone who is not a Christian priest. So that's what the healers are doing now, like presenting that front. Some of them don't present the front of the priest like the first guy, but you still saw how he aligns himself with the church, and they know how powerful. These institutions have existed for 150 years in my part of the world. So they are very powerful. They have worked on people's thinking. So it's not something to dismiss, but something to work around, something to sort of manage and navigate, negotiate. So that's really what is going on. So, but just notice that he calls the Lord and I don't know how this is misaligned. This is the river goddess. But this is the one that people think you should talk about in public. Jehovah, the one who was mentioned. I don't know how this misaligned. That's maybe in the process of sending. So when you saw how he called the Lord of Lords and Jehovah, and then calls the name of slots in the name of the river goddess somewhere in the end, just to let you know where the name first is coming from. Okay, so, and then these are the things he said, which I tried to capture for you. So, pay attention to those that are speaking against me. That's the critical public who criticize so these are the people whom you care about, who should call you to, who try to, how do I say now? So this is just the critical public who are critical of what he's doing. Even as he's doing this, some people still write on Facebook and YouTube and all sorts of places that you are Christian, you are not, this is, what you are doing is not Christian. Even though he has put up all the front. So he still has to address that. So that's where this is coming from. So he gets money, he helps people to get money from God, not from Satan, as those people are saying, right? So, and then, so even aligns himself with the government. How useful this is to the government. If you raise a billionaire, you raise a billionaire, so helping governments to raise people, So understand what is going on. The other person also aligns with government. So this is a very measured, quiet, silent insurgency happening before you. It's an epic battle, but it's not pronounced. It's not militant. It's not, it's not violent. But so I'm inviting you to. Sorry, I just pressed something out of order. Okay, fine. Okay, so then this is the topic. So I decided to stick to the topic that I submitted for this because people would have read and be wondering how we managed to. So, and yeah, so let me also show you. So I've showed this picture to those in HPS, but slightly different kind of framing. So I've mentioned somewhere that the history of anthropology is entangled with the history of European empire. So at some point, it was necessary to control different societies that had the resources that were required to feed the industrialization, the industrial revolution happening in parts of Europe. So you needed cotton, rubber, palm oil, all sorts of things, coal. So and trade and exchange by barter was no longer supplying enough. So you needed to move into the interiors to control the territories. So, and it was difficult sustaining the violence you needed to keep people down. So you needed to then employ something else that is a bit less violent, a bit more sustainable. So anthropologists were unleashed in different societies to live among them, try to learn the language, understand how they think, how they believe. And then so this knowledge helped the empire to sort of establish colonial systems when it was time to do that. So anthropology was very well funded at that point. So, and then how this fed into the university system and the credentialing of the anthropologist is that, because the empire needed to understand societies, non-Western societies, it was sort of institutionalized that to become recognized as a professional anthropologist, you had to leave your environment, go to a strange land, then a strange language, write a report about the group, and then send back. So, because I know this, so I chose to do my own practice in my own community as an act of protest, right? Against that run of things. So, but I still face challenges of like that we just experienced. So this is Recorder. This is my neighborhood where I grew up. These are my friends. We all grew up together. Play soccer together, do all sorts of things. But this conversation was not happening among friends because of this. This is a recorder. So people then began to my friends, sort of wonder what possibilities, what expectations that needed to be managed, what I was going to do with this recording, and what message that would be necessary to pass, that kind of thing. So it's the same thing. This place where I did field work, 14 months of field work in 2016 to 2017. About another thing, not about healers, something we call filiation. The process of acquiring fatherhood of a child, which was different from my own community. So I went to try to understand why they were different, because every community in my side had this flexible filiation, where what determined the fatherhood of a child is the person married to the mother of the child, irrespective of who is biologically responsible for the child. But this group I found just about 20 miles away from, I found that they had a different, their own was strictly biological. So I went to try to find out and ended up spending 14 months in that community. So that's where we were. So this paper would always disrupt things for me. So at some point I then stopped bringing out any paper. Then just talk to people naturally. I would then run back to my room to try to write before I forgot stuff. Okay, so long story. So this is, someone asked me yesterday or the other day where, I think it was you. So this is a response to that question. Like, how do people receive me when I'm doing my field work? So I don't do the field work like a field worker. I'm just normal, relaxing with people. So this is one evening, I just went, there was a funeral in the place where I was doing field work. So I went to hang out to be part of the vigil. And then they also gave me beer, and I was just, but I was trying not to get drunk, so I could remember. So I had this one cup for the whole night. So this is just one of the markets in that community, one of the communities that I've done the field work. So this is where I lived when I was doing the field work. So I had become family with this is the wife of the landlord. So this is how, the field work happens. There's nothing outstanding. It is only when you show up as a white person in this community that you have to spend a long time before people lose their guards in your presence. But in my case, I'm just there. The only challenge I had was some people whom I had taught, members of that community. I came in and said I was doing a research. I presented myself as a student, that kind of. Someone would one day come to see me and say, hey, my lecturer, hey, what are you doing, my So, and then somehow people got to know my identity and I couldn't hide anymore. But somehow I managed to get by. Yeah. Okay, so this is a healer, right? Undisguised. He's not dressed like a priest. He's not pretending about his identity. So the challenge this person faces is that he has less clientele than the other guy dressed like a priest. So the reality compels you to then put up the front that is acceptable to the majority. That's what is going on. So this is another, this is a diviner, right? So these people get less clientele, less, clients. So you have to do this in reaction. Not that what you are has changed, but the front, the smoke screen, the facade is what you have. So that guy is the one in the river, this guy. So this is his social media picture, that kind of. So this is an angel. His picture is measured, directed at Christians who are in the majority. Not necessarily that they are in the majority, but it's something I call clinical dissonance. People are compelled to behave in a certain way that is directed by tradition, but long years of anathematizing that tradition by Western media and school and catechism and all sorts of things. So people now carry this tension. You want to take advantage of this, but you at the same time you worry about some other things that people could say about you. So this is the dissonance people are dealing with. So, and these people already know. So they are trying to sort of align and run with that. So this is another, this is a healer too, right? So this is what one of the healers I visited, I was visiting when I was doing my day's masters, I think. I had talked about to introduce myself, but he was still worried that maybe I was a spy for the church and all that. So, but this is what they are managing to do. Remember my conversation with the first healer. So where he says that God uses, that he likes the Catholic Church because they understand that God uses tradition to heal people. So this is one client that I met in one of the healers' places where I was visiting. So it looks like they are succeeding in getting people to think and talk that way. So this is one client I met, one person who went to consult. Just I met in the compound, one of the healers. This is what he told me. So they are now beginning to agree that it is God that gives them the wisdom to discover the herb with which to heal. Okay. So, a challenge stemming from this scene. This is a market where herbs are sold. That people have knowledge accumulated over centuries of what each herb, what each root does in the body, what each herb does in the body. It's actually these people that supply the knowledge that goes into pharmaceutical products that people take. They then synthesize and preserve and keep, So those who do this ethnopharmacology will tell you better. So people then go here. So those who supply this are the people who have the knowledge. They go to the wild to collect this and then bring to the market. Those who do some healing but do not have not very well versed come here to ask for, okay, give me this one that does this, the other one that does, and then they go to mix for people. So, but it is this that the biomedical practitioners especially, the doctors, physicians, this is the one they criticize. This is the one they represent in their criticism. So they talk about traditional medicine as something unhygienic, unregulated, no dosage, not, no contraindication, no basic information. So it's difficult to argue against. So instead of arguing against and continuing to argue against it, these people then react this way. Right? So they then collect the herb, go to refine, sort of macerate or cook, boil, and whatever, get them, and then package that the one you are convinced is more refined. So this is pharmaceutical, right? So it looks like pharmaceutical. At least you'll be comfortable to take this. At least it shows some hygiene, some. Okay. So, but that's not the full story. They even provide you storage information, contraindication, batch number, date of manufacture, date of expiry, government registration number. Something very interesting happening. Even the doctor, the person who did this, right? Okay. So, but if you hold your breath, this is dosage, right? So what else is going on is that these people know they have a comparative advantage over biomeds. This is a place where people still believe in some spiritual God. So you need to bring that in. So that what you are dealing with is medicine that goes into your system to do some magic, some work. And yet, it mobilizes something else that ordinary pharmaceutical does not have, which is the spiritual angle. Bible, you have to read Bible verses. Psalm 23, Psalm this, and then, so that this becomes even more attractive than the ordinary biomedical, antibiotics. So, but they also supply the active ingredients. And something even more interesting. This is a place dominated by Catholic Church. So, and you know do you know that picture? Is it familiar? Those who know the Virgin Mary, the one who gave birth to Jesus the Christ, and the Catholics hold her in high esteem. So you have to mobilize her as part of the strategy to sort of make this thing even more acceptable. What you are doing, people get to gravitate towards it a bit more. But there's something else. I don't know how much time we have. Oh shit. So maybe I'll get to say more later. But I'm coming to an even ending. There's something else going on here, which I analyzed in one of the papers I already published from this project. I published 2 journal articles from this project. One is in Africa Spectrum. The other one came out last month in Current Anthropology. So, so I'm building a 10th layer sort of argument around the colonial concerns. So, there's histamine. Do you know histamine? That's this blood tonic. It's called histamine. It has been around my part of the world for a long time. It looks like this. It's blood tonic. So this is what is going on here. Is not by chance. Like it's not a random kind of design that, because that is blood tonic. This is also blood tonic, and it has to look like histamine. And it's sort of what is going on is to try to then to displace, to claim that space that histamine has occupied for a long time. And you have to do that under the shadow of histamine. It's a very complicated kind of thinking going on here. So, well, I won't, this like a full paper. I won't say more about this one, since I don't have all the time in the world. But just notice what is going on. We treat and God heals, and the salvation. You can see the religious appeal to religion and appeal to pharmaceutical, to biomedicine. You know, the names of the things that people associate with. So at least you see that they have knowledge, they know how the names of these things, and yet they have herbs but backed up by some spiritual force, you know, that kind of thing. So, but what is interesting that I must mention before I end is how they validate biomedicine and also denounce biomedicine at the same time. To the extent it won't. So what is happening is that guy, remember the first interview where he said there are places where the biomedical has advantage, there are places where the traditional healing has advantage, right? That's what is going on really. So, but these people take advantage of what they think biomedicine has to offer, like laboratory tests, but where biomedicine competes, they have a way of undermining biomedicine there. So, especially the medicine, they say it doesn't heal it doesn't treat diseases to the core. You know, it continues to reoccur. But it is traditional healing that roots it out. So, which the other guy also mentioned, right? So, anyways, there are claims to ancestral, knowledge, to God, to technology, to all sorts of things that can be brought into, okay. So another form of denunciation, right? Another healer told me this. Yeah, so this is to discourage you from going to, next time, you should come straight. Don't start going around to psychiatric. Okay. So, now, when we think about, I don't know whether reading this will distract you? How do I manage your attention now? That's what I'm wondering. When we think about decoloniality, decolonizing social research, decolonizing research, which I think there's something fundamentally wrong. With that, I think we are going to address it in one of the questions. Because what it does is that it sort of flattens the history of humanity and then reduces it to 500 years. We have been here for 300,000 years. 290,000 out of that 3,000 years where people were roaming and moving around, and settled life began after domestication of plants and animals, perhaps from about 12,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. And a lot has happened. From the ancient Egyptian civilization to the Athenian to the Near East to the, all sorts of things that even gave birth to Christianity. Philosophy that you study, people refer to Greece. They were actually started in Black Egypt, and a lot has happened. So civilizations are accretional. They get built on. No civilization fell from the sky. No civilization was built in isolation. So, but the point I'm making, when people think about decoloniality and all, they think about the Western, neoliberal capitalist expansion that is happening around this period. I think it's very reductionist. And people also think about key figures, known figures that fought and commanded armies and empires that went to war to conquer and to colonize and to enslave. But it is the quiet insurgency, the quiet reworking, reconstituting, the quiet reworking of things that really shapes civilization. It's not those epic battles. They happen. But the things that actually even forge the thinking that drives empire in the first place actually happen very quietly over many generations. That's what I need to call your attention to. That's what is really going on here, which I've tried to capture as much as I can, as a scholar, just putting my eyes on the ground to really see what is going on. So that's basically the point I want to draw out, so that people do not think of decolonial discourses. If you read authorities, Walter Mignolo, Escobar, all sorts of people who write, so they seem to be so we will say more, right? So for now, these are the thoughts I leave with you, coming from the experience I've been trying to garner in my life, in my work.
Thank you very much, Chidi. I think for interest of time, we'll save questions until the roundtable at the end.
Yes,
and it would be really interesting to link what you said with the article that you attached to the event program, which develops those ideas about getting away from ideas of syncretism and more towards thinking about different kinds of agency. Really, really interesting. Thank you very much. Mercedes.
So, well, as Rosanna told you, I'm part of a researcher at the National Institute of Agricultural Technology. I work specifically in an institute that focuses on research and technology development for family farmers in Patagonia. As English is not my mother tongue, not my academic language, I will apologize in advance for my mistakes or the ones in the PowerPoint. And I will also try to avoid losing time, and I will read a little bit, so it is easier for me. So this presentation includes part of my PhD thesis and some updates and new ideas and analysis that I have worked on in the past years. Before I begin, I would like to say that all my research has been financed by Argentinian public organisms, like the National Scientific and Technical Research Council, the Ministry of Science, the University of Buenos Aires, and my own institutions, and all of them are now at risk by the underfunding of our national government and by discrediting campaigns. So, well, it is a pleasure for me to be here now. So, why study Patagonia? As other regions of the global south, Argentina as a country has experienced uneven political development and economical development. The Spanish Empire colonized its territory around the 15th century, and the central and northwestern part of the country were the areas that the most integrated into the colonial economy, while the other territories remained under the control of the indigenous population. That was the case of Patagonia in the southern cone, except for some attempts of colonization, especially in the southern part with the British nations, and also some travelers and explorers that came through the territory during many expeditions. After Argentina gained its independence in 1816, the national government tried to expand its control over the rest of the territory and came to the Patagonia, and it first incorporated as a national territory with less rights for the people who live on it, and then it turned into provinces in 1957. We are young provinces of the national administration. So there are now 5 provinces, well, I will tell this later, in Patagonia, the one that is from the north to the south, Neuquén, Río Negro, Chubut, it's the one that is colored, Santa Cruz and Guerra del Fuego, Antarctica, and the South Atlantic Islands. The development of Argentina was concentrated in the area of the Pampas, the one with the green circle, and it was focused on the agricultural development, while the rest of the country remained as dedicated to different economies that were important for the national consumption. Most of the production of the Pampas are exported. In Patagonia, we have a different situation that I'm going to talk later about some important products that are for export. Geophysically, Patagonia has 2 main areas. The one near the Andes, yes, in the west, it's the Andean range, that are the mountains and the lakes and all the beautiful parts that you may see in pictures. And the other, the larger area is the extra Andean area with the trials. That is this kind of landscape. So as I said, well, livestock production, especially sheep livestock production, has been the main economic activity in Patagonian drylands since the end of the 19th century. Nowadays, wool from these sheep are still one of the main exports from the region after mineral extraction and fishing. This trend is from Chubut. It is the number of livestock, but it's similar in other provinces. And it shows that after this big, this upward trend until the mid-century, 20th century, the number of animals decreased and it never go back to its peaks. How this is explained? Well, the decline is multi-causal. I will not go there, but one of the major factors or drivers that have been said to explain this productive crisis is desertification or land degradation. Desertification is not a natural process. It's not the advance of a desert. It is defined by the United Nations of the Convention to Combat Desertification in 1994 as a process with natural and human cause factors that reduces that results in a gradual loss of soil productivity and reduces the vegetation cover over the drylands. You know, when the man in the video says that he picks up the earth and says it is all going here and we are going to lose everything. So, as this problem has been considered one of the drivers of the livestock production, also livestock production has been considered one of the drivers of the certification in Patagonia, since it is said that these large numbers of animals in these productive areas has led to this decrease of the certification. So, as we will see, the certification has been a problem with a long history in our area, and these two maps shows the levels of degradation in two different moments, and as we can see, it hasn't improved in 10 years, and it hasn't improved after that also. So why it hasn't improved? Well, if we looking at through literature, I found out that most of the studies of Chubut and the rest of Patagonia about the drylands were conducted of biologists or ecologists or agronomic engineers. And well, this is Web of Science and Cielo, that is one of the main libraries, scientific libraries in Spanish, and it shows that it keeps being like that, no? Except for what some cases of interdisciplinary studies, it keeps being addressed by natural scientists. So when I started my research, there was a lot of solutions proposed by technicians about the problem. They have a clear diagnosis of what to do and technical solutions. Some technicians says, well, we need to close drylands, put a fence, and took out the people from there, took out the animals, and let the vegetation grow back. So as a sociologist, I was, what? How can this be possible? Others argue that there are solutions, but farmers or producers don't apply. So why? Why was this happening? Why can be those types of arguments the solutions to these problems? So, well, why do I talk in my title of my presentation is about environmental problems and not the certification? Well, in these recent years, the certification overlapped with droughts, specifically a long period that came from 2007 until 2012, with rain levels that were below the average, the half of the historical average. And in addition, in 1991, 2008, 2011, and 2015, volcanoes spread ashes throughout the territory. So when I started to do my research, people talked me about the wind, the snowfall, the rainfall, and all these kind of things, and nothing about the certification. So I started to think, well, what's happening here? And besides all that, nowadays we have climate change. So, well, I tried to analyze how all these as environmental problems are combined, are addressed in different by different social agents. In fact, I want to mention about climate change that extreme snowfall that appeared in the previous chart is a rare situation in recent years. As I say, the most frequent way in which climate change is been showing in the region is about rainfall reduction, as it can be seen in the map on the left. That is the first part of the century. The conditions were extremely severe, and the projections for the next decades are also happening with temperature that it's the same. In the recent trend, it has been worse, hotter than in the past, and it is going to be much more hotter in the following decades. So due to this coexistence of environmental problems, I ended up studying how environmental problems are socially constructed through the interpretations and practices of social agents, and how they are conditioned, these interpretations and practice, by material conditions, symbolic and cultural ideas. In this presentation, I want to talk a lot about producers and how they address these issues. That's why I wanted to bring the documentary, to have their voices also here. I will concentrate more on how sciences and public policies have approached environmental problems in the region in the long term, but specifically in the last few decades. I will try to see how sciences have influenced in policies and in the back, and how these sciences and policies are contested from inside each area and from the rest of the society. Throughout the presentation, I will highlight how production of knowledge and politics involve these power dynamics among different agents and the relations with international, national, and also local powers. And I will show how these science approaches and these public policies might have been involved in reproducing some inequalities in the area. Well, Latin American political ecology has provided me the lens through which to analyze these processes, considering how different social agents appropriate and define nature, and also to consider this need to historicize the natural foundations of the society and to conduct situated studies about these society-nature relations. I also find attractive about this approach how it proposes or encourages us to see the political nature of the ecological processes and the political processes that leave a mark in nature. Besides, I work with some other contributions from critical agrarian studies, some theories of the states, environmental history and sociology of science, that contributed with reflections about the role of science, the state intervention, the social organization of agriculture, and the role of technicians. So my research involved a variety of sources. I mainly conducted interviews for my research with different social agents and in different provinces and in different movements. But today I will show more about, I will focus more on the historical reconstruction, and which I work on with documents from different public organisms, with other research of the local historiography, and with newspapers and other kind of material that came from from journals and historical documents. And I will try to show how in the definition of these environmental problems, how they are selected and how they are defined, involves thinking of different ways about the nature, about the temporality, about the space, and about the social agency. About nature, about how is it considered, if they consider nature as something external, or something that is part of who they are. You know, one of the men in the documentary, he said it's part, you feel good when you're here. Yeah? Regarding space, how they set the boundaries of where environmental problems are located, and how, where do they say that the environmental problems are located, and about the temporality, the time frame that they use to think of when this started to happen, when is it going to be solved, when can we do something, when it's necessary to do things, and also about social agency, if we are able to do something about these environmental problems or not, and how do these agents think of their own practices and how they affect environmental problems. So just a quick timeline with some of the environmental problems throughout Patagonia's history. Some of them. Most of them are the ones that appear during my research as a part of the social, environmental social memory, I would say. They don't have all the same impact in all the areas, and they are not remembered in the same way, but I wanted to bring it to you because it might appear in some moment. So as I told you before, even the colonial settlement, the region was traversed by travelers and naturalists who studied it throughout observation, mainly throughout observation, and what we might call a holistic natural approach. They were worried about how all the different components of environmental, the environment works and combine, and also about how they could be important for production, no? Its productive capacity of the different areas in Patagonia. And also in these diaries and memories of travelers through Patagonia, we find the first registers of environmental problems in the area. Then, when the national state appears in the region, it took some time till the first national institutions were settled in the region, but there were previously some researchers doing research in the area. But when the first regional institutes settled there, they were starting to have this more systematic and disciplinary research, as I told you, most from biology and agronomic engineer. And there started also the first empirical analysis about the solutions of these environmental problems, the models and testings in the fields to see how they can sustain the livestock production. It is really interesting to see some notes about, for example, trying to bring some forage from the Pampas to Patagonia that failed, and of course it will fail, it is freezing in Patagonia, so but it has been done in this time. So, and then we have these national and regional scientists formed in the region with a memory and local teams conformed in the region, and since that period studies started to begin to have different theoretical approach: ecology, sustainable development, socio-ecological approaches, desert, whatever. There were many different kind of theoretical approach to address these environmental problems. And they also started to come these large projects from outside the region that came with also funding from the exterior, from which the local institutions tried to adapt their lines of research to fulfill the requirements of these large projects to be in Patagonia, and from there they keep on working on the topics that they wanted to research. And that's how, for example, the certification diagnosis programs were conducted in the area. And if I told you, well, this brief history of the scientific approaches involves in different moments different definitions of the environmental problems and different ways, as I told you, about how nature, space, temporality, and social agents is considered, or it is prioritized in each moment. Doesn't mean that another kind of languages or another kind of discourses of ideas were in the region, but the ones in the table are like the most dominant in different moments. So in the most recent, I won't go through the whole chart, but I will focus in the last moment where we can see that there are many different interpretations of the problems of nature, of how the temporality of these problems needs to be addressed and needs to be studied and needs to be solved. And especially there are many ways of how scientists think about what can humans do about these problems. And it appears again this idea of naturalization, that especially with climate change, that this is something that is coming to us, and it's nothing that could be done to do about it. It appears before with droughts, and now with climate change it appears again. So that leads us to some scientific controversies regarding among the scientists. And well, these are just a few that I wanted to bring. For example, the definition of how droughts are considered, if they are a shock, or if that is a permanent situation that will be defining our future in the region, and that we need to get solutions to adapt to this permanent situation in the future. Scientists also disagree about how are the causes of degradation of the situation of drylands, and that's the one in green. And I will like to say that mainly this is focused or is related because of there are still many of the research that are still based on disciplinary analysis, so they are just looking only for one part of the problems. And one of the most recent controversies about drylands is about the role of wildlife. For example, the guanacos, it's this kind of this animal that it is native, and it reduces its population when the sheep arrive to the region, and now it's growing a lot because there are less sheep, there is more space for them to grow, and it's creating a lot of conflict in some areas in Patagonia. And scientists are also discussing what to do, and this is just a few of the hundreds of papers that are about how the conflict in about sheep and guanacos are in the region. And it's really interesting to read it from an outside perspective like mine, because sometimes their analysis, I don't know, their models or the empirical research that they do doesn't necessarily fundament the solutions or the recommendations that they do about what to do in the case of guanacos or sheep. So when a paper is written maybe from people from CONICET or from NGOs that are from the conservation side, they recommend to, well, improve the protection of guanacos and avoid the loss of to hunt them. And when they came from technical institutions like my own, they start doing, well, we need to do something with guanacos because we are going to lose all the producers in the region and something like that. So it is really interesting how they are fighting, not always about the data, but about the solutions that they perceive. So one last thing about the science's approach that I would like to say is that although in the last decade the scientific approach are not blaming anymore indigenous and peasant communities about their role in environmental problems, they have not fully addressed or considered in the research. So one quick example of that is the proposal of the stock reduction that many scientists do about when they say, well, this area is not longer available to have this amount of animals, but they are not consider that there is a family living from that. So that's why the proposals are not including, or it's a way of that they are not including the communities in their proposals and on their research. So regarding the political organization of Argentina, our country introduced some sustainable development paradigm in 1994 with the last amendment of the National Constitution. At the same time, that defines that the provinces need to own the natural resources, so they are the ones that needs to be responsible to take care of them. Although many of the international programs and international fundings keep coming to the national government and keep coming to Patagonia through the national institutions. So three important aspects regarding this. Well, the national and international programs applied in the territory has not always allowed the people in Patagonia to define how these public policies are implemented and if they address the needs of the local population. Second, that provincial institutions regarding environmental problems are new in the region. There has been created in the last decades. They usually lack of resources, not only money, but technical resources, and they are usually in charge of dealing with extractivist activities. So they are concentrated on regulating, I don't know, oil production or mineral production, and they have even less resources to address other kind of environmental problems. So they are not addressing these kind of problems right now. Now, in the last 2 or 3 years, we have some examples of some policies regarding environmental climate change and addressing some urban problems, not a lot about the rural areas. So in this way, environmental problems have been mainly addressed in Patagonia by agrarian agencies like my institute, that it has this part of research, but it has also a part of extension. So it has conducted many of the public policies in the regions, and others like the Family Farming Institute that it was mentioned in the documentary. So that is a way in which we are going to see that the environmental environmental problems are always addressed with sheep crisis, sheep production, or livestock production, because it is in that context that it emerged. So if we saw the same chart that before about the sciences in the case of politics, there are environmental policies were developed in the region long after they appear as problems in the area, mainly due to this naturalization idea that at the first they were considered, well, this is something that's happened because they are drylands, so there's nothing we can do. So when they started in the mid-20th century, they first started talking about soil, desertization, erosion, that all those terms are not referring or are leaving out humans of the definition, right? And when they started to appear, is to blame them about the poor use of the lands or about the poor management that they are doing. In the at the end of the 20th century, this approach has changed a lot, and the certification, as I told you, appear like the main term that unify all these other terms before, and it is really linked with the UN's convention that it made this closure of the term. In the last period, it appears more, as I told you, the idea of climate change and droughts as the main focus of the national of the environmental policies. So let's look deeper in this last part. Well, this is a summary of the policies in Chubut since the 90s to 2015. As it can be seen, there are both short-term and long-term policies. The long-term are more related to the evaluation and to monitoring, and the short-term are more related to droughts and volcanic ashes problems. And long-term policies, so that's why most of the policies, short-term policies, are mainly related to address the emergencies that were done because of droughts and volcanic ashes. Only some of them were trying to develop some strategies or ideas about adaptation to these problems, but even though when these emergency policies appear and they are related to peasants, as you will see, they are not trying to change nothing on the way of working, of the way of living, just past the moment, no? They were mainly palliative measures. And only in some cases there was this idea of, I think something changed, well, this color should be here, some policies that propose some kind of transformation in the way of working or in the way of dealing with the environment, so they can make people or producers especially more prepared for the future. But even though these programs were supposed to be like that, in the practice they end up also proposing short-term and emergency actions. So it was not about the idea, but about the way that the policies were implemented. And as I told you, most of the decarbonization policies were addressing producers in the proposals and in the way of they think of action in regarding these problems, and stakeholders as the proposals of generating information, only language information. And as I told you, the emergency were most dedicated to peasant indigenous communities or smallholders, as they were mentioned in the past. Only the volcanic ashes measures about social aid and face mask delivery were addressed as rural population. The other ones are addressed in the way of as these people are related to the productive system. So quickly, the implementations of these public policies were not just taken from granted. There were a lot of controversies about the different public policies inside the state and about how they are defined, the scales, the socio-productive scope that they were addressing, and also about this short-term, long-term strategy way of dealing or proposing the solutions. And they were also contested by farmers, by other social agents in the area about what actions are prioritized, how they define the spaces that they're going to be beneficiaries, and what are the objectives or the temporalities that they are considering. So what happened after 2015? Well, we have a neoliberal government and we have a Peronist government with a COVID and a really difficult internal situation. So that what I will say is that environmental problems were not the main problem in this moment. So during this last decade, in both areas there was a shift towards climate change as the focus of the research and the public policies that might lead us again to this naturalization of the problems. But there are also some initiatives about conservation of these ecological systems that haven't appeared in the past. Natural parks, for example, in Patagonia are in the mountain range. There were not many conservation areas in the drylands of Patagonia, and there are now. There are also changes in the way of they are defined. It appears the term of family farmer as a way of unifying peasant indigenous communities, capitalized family farmer, and blurring their differences. That is problematic, or at least from my view as a sociologist. And there has been some international problems and some small local and national initiatives that keep on going with what it has been done before. The video that we saw, it was part of this initiative. That is, it was the last large program about in the region in drylands. It is a project that proposed a participatory, multidimensional approach to addressing vulnerability, and the project aimed to develop a strategy. Multi-relational strategy to address this vulnerability, and the end of the proposal was to ask for funds to the Green Fund for Climate, Green Climate Fund, sorry, and this project also will involve monitoring and a participatory implementation that will probably allow just to make changes in the technical approaches during the implementation. But I will tell you what happened then. And during the Milei's government, well, under this current right-wing libertarian government that we have, environmental problems policies have suffered from attempts to eliminate laws regarding glaciers, forests, and other natural elements. There are also attempts to leave international agreements like the Paris Agreement, and the institutional responsible to address environmental problems have been dismantled or defunded. So there are not many environmental policies since 2023, unless the ones that were already working. And in science, it happened something similar. We have suffered from the dismantlation of the Ministry of Science, budget shortcuts, brain drain, and also the retention of funds that were already assignated to research projects. So there is a lot of science about environmental problems in Israel now. And that happens also regarding this project that I told you. We never got the approval from the national government to ask for the funds due to the denialist vision of the president about climate change. So even though we have the opportunity to address these issues as climate change that are really a trend in the world now, we are not being able to achieve them now. So just to close, well, the idea, as Rosanna told at the beginning, the idea of a neutral science or a state working for the common goods is not happening in Patagonia. Environmental problems has also demonstrated a prevailing productivist valuation language in our history, and the ways that they have approached from sciences and from public policies are an expression of these productivist language values. So sheep production and how to improve has been dominant throughout the history. And even though with this, when there are some public policies that were more global or with a more transformative proposal, due to emergencies and due to power relations in the area, they end up only addressing some short-term initiatives. So dealing with these complex problems involves more creative solution from our part and not the repetition of all these short-term and inefficient measures, or even our scientific global trends. It also, for me, implies taking in consideration these historical and political mechanisms that are addressed in environmental problems and how social agents are dealing with them. So thank you, and thank you for my colleagues who lend me pictures from different parts of Patagonia.